So digital readiness, this is what we'd like to talk about today. First, we'll unpack the term digital readiness and find out what it is that we're talking about. Then I'd like to introduce you to the 3 pillars of digital readiness and see them. There'll be 12 elements to them packed into those 3 pillars. And finally, we'll look at how to make it sustainable and how to make sure it's not just a one-off. Now, digital readiness, what do we mean by that? Well, let's start with what do we mean by digital. And I'd like to look at a definition from MIT Sloan School of Management, who have done a lot of thinking in this direction. And they call digital the adoption of SMACIT technologies. And what they mean by that is social, mobile, analytics, cloud, and the Internet of Things. If you think about that, there's a big one missing here, which is web, and I guess that's just not sexy enough to integrate in this or a fairly long acronym, but it is still the bread and butter of digital interaction. Now, digital is surrounded by a lot of myths, and for one, what it's not is a cost center. So a lot of people think about digital as something that's just a cost to the cost of doing business. It's more than that. It's also definitely not something the IT department does. That's also something we find frequently in our clients, that's the way they see digital. It definitely isn't, and marketers are guilty of thinking of it that way, a tactical channel in the marketing mix. It goes way beyond that, and we'll explore how. It's also not just about the customer experience. So that's an initial thinking that we say, well, digital is how I can interact with an organization. And yes, it is, but that's definitely not all it is. It's also not just relevant to technology companies. Yes, they were the first to adopt digital ways of working, but it's now permeated every industry there is. It's also not just relevant to B2C companies. So we often think that this is just something that is relevant if you deal with consumers. No, it's also relevant to B2C companies. But also it isn't just relevant to companies as such. It definitely has a lot of relevance to governments. What it is a strategic competency you as an organization will adopt. The way we think of it at Reading Room is ultimately what will happen is that digital isn't something you do in addition to doing business. It is how you do business. As everything moves towards digital, you look at every aspect of what you do and how that can be supported by digital. So what do we mean by readiness? Well, a lot of organizations talk about readiness and maturity and digital transformation and so on. One of them is Capgemini, and they look at 2 axes. They did this research a couple of years ago where they looked at 2 axes. One looks at the digital, what they call digital intensity, which is what technology-enabled initiatives do organizations undertake. The other one is what they call transformation management intensity, which is what leadership capabilities do these organizations have in the area of digital. And they've mapped lots and lots of business against those, and you see there's a fair spread across those axes among them. But what it showed us is that leaders in digital, so those in the top right-hand corner, if you will, outperform the market overall, both in revenue generation and particularly in profitability. So if you're a digital straggler, you're actually lagging 24% behind in profitability to the digital leaders. Now, when we talk about digital, frequently people think about the digital face of the organization, so how people interact with you using digital means as customers of your organization. But we would like to think that it goes a lot further than that. It's the back end of the organization that can be supported with digital means. And that goes from your operational structures, your internal organization, your funding, your people, and so on. And to put all of this in context, we'd like to think about 3 pillars of digital readiness, and that's digital business, the digital markets, and digital resources at your disposal to get on that path to becoming a digital native organization. And I'd like to go through those in sequence. Let's start with digital business, and the first element in that is strategy, which is not necessarily the starting point. You may be doing a lot of the other things already before you embark on strategy. But when you do, what we'd like to think is that you don't just look at business strategy and then think that digital strategy is something that complements that we do in addition to it, but rather that you infuse your business strategy with digital means. This is Jeannie Ross, who's the director of MIT, of the Information Systems Research Center at MIT Sloan, aforementioned, and she says, don't worry about developing a strategy for social or mobile or cloud or any other technology. Develop a strategy for succeeding in this digital economy. It's a strategy of succeeding as a business. It's a purpose that leverages your capabilities in response to market opportunities. In other words, business. And then you grab every technology that takes you there in any of those aspects, hence 3 pillars with the 12 elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to illustrate each one of those points with a case study. And this one is Nordstrom, which is a prominent and successful North American retail company. And Nordstrom is known for its customer service. Their mission is to provide outstanding service every day. And that's what they work hard towards. Now, in support of that, they came up with a digital business strategy quite a while ago. Last decade, what they've done is they've implemented new systems that allow their sales people, who are already very geared to customer service, to track individual customers' requests and needs. They launched an innovation lab, which created very popular Nordstrom apps. They introduced mobile checkout, and mobile checkout makes it easier for any employee to see a customer through the payment process rather than sending to cash register. So that's how they pursue their business strategy. They acquired a cloud-based men's personalized clothing service because personalized clothing service, again, is entirely aligned with their strategy. And what Nordstrom hasn't done is that they haven't used social media, analytics, cloud, and Internet of Things to develop a digital business model. What they've done is they've taken their existing business model and digitized it and pursued their purpose using these technologies. So that's what we like to see. Secondly, let's look at leadership. There's the obvious element. A digital permeated business strategy must obviously be supported by the C-suite, and that only a digitally savvy C-suite has the credibility to actually consider digital strategies and then pursue them. And if that isn't the case in your organization, you need to consider training or workshopping right at the top level, because without that top level backing, it won't work. But leadership doesn't just mean the C-suite. It can happen at any level in the organization. So what you should do, and we'll talk about that more in structures, is consider structures and processes that support leadership wherever it occurs in the organization at any level. But coming back to top management can actually and does frequently lead the brand from the front in digital. And to give you a case study for that, this gentleman here is Dharmesh Shah. He's the founder and CTO of HubSpot, and HubSpot is an inbound marketing software company, which are going to have an IPO this year, and they're valued at about $500 million US. And Dharmesh Shah is very active in social media. Despite being obviously a founder of a startup, a very successful startup, and very busy, he's got almost 500,000 followers on LinkedIn. He runs a group on LinkedIn for entrepreneurs of almost 500,000 members. He runs a Facebook group called On Startups, which has over 150,000 members, and he's got 250,000 followers on Twitter. So he's very active. He's got a big network. But it's not the size of the network, it's how you use it. So, for example, what Dharmesh has done is recently they had a hiring push at HubSpot, and he tweeted about the company's need for talent. And he got not just CVs that way, but he got referrals for candidates, because he was followed by so many people who knew people who would probably like to work at HubSpot, and they hired quite a few of those who came in that way. Or in another example, they had an error problem in a product that they had, and he just went out and asked his followers for help. And it took mere hours to receive suggestions, including a complete instruction for how to debug the program from one of their loyal customers. So this is him using his massive social network for advancing the company. Now, if you look into digital networking by leaders, there are 3 things that they should focus on. One is reputation. So can they provide high quality, immediately applicable content? And the goal always has to be to help your audiences be better in their job. Can you specialize in something? Now, if you write about anything you're interested in or your company does, that's too broad. Dharmesh Shah specializes in technology and entrepreneurship, and focuses very clearly on those 2 topics. And finally, your network position can be used to bridge otherwise unconnected groups and to make synergy effects happen that way. That's something that digital leadership can do. Let's look at structure. So this is a McKinsey global survey from last year, and they found that particularly in large companies of more than $1 billion revenue, the number one problem is the organizational structure in hampering the adoption of digital into the business. And the reason for that is that traditional hierarchical structures don't work particularly well. So what we can do is we can learn from digital startups. Even as a big organization, even as a government agency, you can learn from startups by focusing, rather than on roles and positions in the hierarchy, to focus on tasks. What you want to do is you enable agility in your business by removing things that get in the way of value creation. It's easier said than done, but what you can do in terms of structure is create small multidisciplinary teams that work in a nested structure or in a fractal structure. That obviously needs you to give employees autonomy and responsibility that they can do their own thing. And it has to be built customer-centric. Very often you find structures built on internal view of the business, which isn't always wrong. But hierarchy is only one way to do it, and you can actually keep your hierarchy and have, for particular initiatives, for strategic initiatives, have skunk works or have coalitions or have other forms of networked organization that draw on the hierarchy. So you don't need to smash your current way of organizing in order to enable this. An example is First Direct, which is a UK direct bank, part of the HSBC group. And they are well known. They do phone and internet banking only. They're a fairly large organization. And their brand is built on absolutely top customer service. This is actually the reason why people switch to First Direct. Now, their contact center they understood that needed restructuring because it was siloed, like many contact centers are. So most of them have an IVR system, interactive voice recognition, that sends you to a different person depending on what your need is. But you may have more than one need at a time, or you may not be able to articulate it properly. They changed it so that a call always directly leads you to a human, and they removed the knowledge silo. So they trained up all their staff in most topics, and they empowered them both with the ability and the authority to respond, but also with all the digital tools and information required to quickly answer any questions that a customer might have. And the result is they win awards left, right, and center. That's just the 9 that they won last year, and it keeps going on, and they continually voted as the most trusted brand in banking in the UK. Let's look at processes then. So once we have structures in place, what are the processes guiding that? Now this quote, ostensibly by Charles Darwin, that it's not the strongest of the species that survives nor the most intelligent, but it's the most adaptable to change. I've covered over Darwin here because he didn't actually say that. It's the slightly less well-sounding name of Leon Megginson who did. But the point stays, survival of the fittest means the ones who are most adaptable to change. And particularly in a digital world, change is the constant. So what we need to do in processes is develop the capacity to respond to change. We tend to optimize operations and think, phew, we've done that, our operations work well, that'll go for the next 5 years. Nowadays, it won't. What you need to do is re-engineer your processes around those digital interactions as you go along, both internal processes as well as those who touch clients and suppliers. And to do that, you adopt agile methodologies. Now, you may or may not be familiar with agile software development as a concept, but what it means is you build change into your processes. So your processes can correct themselves, and you can roll out process changes in an iterative way. Obviously, again, you have to empower staff to recognize things that are wrong with the process and to trigger improvements to them. Now, 4 elements of agile methodology I'd like to touch on. Adaptability. It means adopt an iterative approach. Analyze KPIs on the basis of your processes and change as needed. That requires teamwork. That means you have to have cross-functional teams where everyone brings their own unique skill set to the table. This doesn't work if you do 6-month periods where you try to bite off a large chunk. Instead, focus on short sprints and roll out actual process changes after each round. And then you learn from each round and you apply the learnings. That's an agile way of working. And finally, communication. In order to do that, in order to, as I said in the previous slide, to empower your staff to recognize problems in your processes and change them, you need to allow open and efficient communication. And you can do that with as simply as having things prominently displayed in the office where these people sit. An example for this is Codelco. Codelco is the world's largest copper producer. They're owned by the Chilean state, and they looked at the future of mining in a strategic way. And what they did a long time ago, actually, is create something called Codelco Digital. And over the last decade and a bit, they implemented loads of operational and strategic objectives to support the business in mining automation and the CEO in carrying a digital vision. And today they've got 4 mines operating fully automatically and information being shared in real time with empowered staff who can actually do something about any problems in operations. That required culture change. And that's actually, the process innovation was partially driven by staff. And their CIO actually says that their company is so conservative that changing the culture and changing the processes to support a different culture was the first thing they had to do. And what they did was create internal innovation awards to promote everyone in the business to come up with new ideas and innovate the processes they had. And they found that they were quite surprised that truck drivers were able to innovate processes. It doesn't have to be the white-collar workers in an office somewhere. Now, the second pillar is the digital markets. And the most obvious one there is products. Your products and services, and the obvious thing to ask there, are your products and services digitally enabled? So can your customers use digital means to interact with you and your products and your services? How do you need to redesign your services to match the working practices or the lifestyle of your customers? And an example for that would be HEMA Maps, which is an Australian company. They produce mapping software. They produced maps, paper maps, for four-wheel drivers, off-roaders and hikers in the Australian bush. And they realized that this business wasn't going to survive for much longer. Printed maps are a dying market. You've got Google Maps, you've got other devices and services coming up. And what they realized was that they weren't in the business of printing or selling maps. They were in the business of helping nature lovers get inspired and then go and do their trips. That's what they were really good at. So what they changed is their business model to support digital products, including some specialized mobile apps, digital map data you can download, as well as an entire device that actually does this navigation better than anything you could get on the market at the time. And their website now enables you to make DIY maps on the go right on the website. So they've digitized, or digitalized, if you will, their entire service palette and their products to react to the market changes. Now, customers, this is usually a driver of why you would go digital in your business. We usually get customers wrong. This is a study from us. They ask us, why do you think consumers follow you on social sites? And on the right-hand side, you see that most thought it was to learn about new products, get general information, blah, 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 but least of all to make a purchase or to get a discount. Then they asked consumers the same question and found that it's pretty much exactly the other way around. So businesses frequently get wrong why consumers want to use digital with them. So your first task then should be to understand your customers. And the best approach to do that is not, as you might think, to go out there and ask them what they want. The results you get from that is usually fairly poor. People don't have the imagination what you could do for them. Or as Henry Ford said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse, not a car. So the best approach is not to ask people what they want, it's to understand them, understand their preferences, their goals, how they behave, and then relate that to what you can do for them. And you design your digital products and services to solve the problems that you found in this way. And to give you an example, Royal Caribbean is one of the world's largest, or I think the largest cruise provider. And they rolled out their new Oasis class, which are the largest cruise ships in the world. They can carry 5,500 passengers. And you can imagine how massive that ship is on the outside and on the inside. And they thought about every aspect of this ship, and they wanted to make this really good for guests. Now, they researched what people cared about, not what they wanted from the cruise line, but what they cared about. They found out that people have no tolerance for queues. They have no tolerance for being herded like sheep on an offshore excursion, and they're really frustrated when they have to go around in a restaurant this big and find in a ship and find restaurants or shows they want to see. So people want to feel like they're in a small boat. And they also like to use their own devices. That's what they found. Now, rather than making queues more endurable, what Royal Caribbean did was try to eliminate them. And they did that by implementing a range of combinations of digital and physical resources across 26 processes. And that includes things like GPS devices that people can self-guide themselves with on an offshore excursion. So it doesn't feel like they're trudging behind the herd dog. Or, they use shape recognition cameras in the restaurants to automatically detect when a restaurant's full and guide people using their own digital devices to other options in the ship so that it never feels like they're in too big a vessel. So those are things that they discovered because they investigated what people really wanted. Now, partners is a frequently underestimated aspect of this. You can go and make your business absolutely smoothly running on a fantastic highway, the super sports car of processes and structure and leadership and everything. And as soon as your suppliers or your partners come into the picture, it turns into a nightmare because they don't interface with you in the same way. So it's very important to look at how your partners and suppliers interact with you because they may hamper your efforts to become more digital. So investigate all of the interfaces you have with your partners and suppliers, the human ones as well as the technical ones. And you find time sinks and you find where time is lost and where people get frustrated, both your staff and your partner staff. And then you look for digital solutions to integrate at those boundaries. And just a quick example there, Laing O'Rourke is a global construction company. They've got 15,000 staff, about $7 billion in revenue. And what they did was enable something called digital engineering, where they worked with their partners and their suppliers to provide them with a particular, excuse me, a particular type of digital product catalog, which they can integrate into their own software so that the designers at Laing O'Rourke can actually use the products with their correct specifications in their designs, which makes their designs more accurate and which allows them at the press of a button then to go and order the things that they've used. And this has very much increased their productivity in their digital efforts. Finally, in digital market, competition. Looking at the competition and looking at what they're doing in digital is very important, but don't remain fixated on chasing competitors, because you could look at comparators as well. Those are organizations that don't do exactly what you do, but have a certain similarity to you in terms of how they deal with their customers, for example. And you can look at where the market as a whole is heading. So to give you an example here, this is Marshall Industries. They used a company, an electronics distributor, and they saw their competition dying away because the market was disintermediated by the internet. So they reacted to that and they used digital technology to turn themselves from simply a place where you bought in bulk to somewhere that consults you and gives you solutions. And they are now thriving on consultation and on solutions design in the market that were pretty much wiped off the earth by the internet. And finally, digital resources. Let's look at the resources that you have at your disposal. And most important about those is obviously people. Digital literacy is very important in that. So people need to be able to use digital resources to research and analyze and validate information. And they need to use them to collaborate together. They also need to take these technologies and combine them into something new. So it's really important to understand those differences between digital natives and digital immigrants. And you can internally apply training and mentorship that goes for both formal and informal ones to drive that adoption and to drive people towards being more effective digital workers. And you have to provide a culture that rewards innovation. And an example of that is at O2, which is one of the UK's largest mobile telecommunications providers. And this lady here is Anne Pickering. She's the Group HR Director at O2. And she once asked one of her interns in HR what she thought of her induction process. And she said she was very young. She was a millennial. And she said she thought it was very paper-driven and chalk and talk and a bit PowerPointy. And so Pickering said to the intern, well, go away and do something about it. So the intern went away and she had a background in computer science. And what she did was create an app for onboarding, which was so good that the HR director actually rolled it out across the entire group. And Pickering, the HR director, said, and I quote, "It's outstanding. But what was so interesting is that it wasn't a big deal to her, to the intern. She blew me away, but she was quite surprised at my reaction. She was a true digital native and thought, of course, this is how we do onboarding." So harnessing digital natives is an important way you can get digital initiatives working. Secondly, money. And there's the obvious elements of that is, are you investing in digital initiatives? Do you have the budget set aside to do that? Have you got KPIs so you can actually calculate your return on investment on your digital transformation initiatives? Does your budget recognize that? That's a necessity. But also you could look a bit outside the center of this and say, how are you raising funds for digital improvement initiatives? And one thing that you might have heard about is Kickstarter, which is frequently used by startup companies to fund the development of a new product that otherwise wouldn't get off the ground. But increasingly large companies are also using crowdfunding to fund things that otherwise would be iffy to produce. This is an example from entertainment where Veronica Mars was a very successful TV show in the US, and they wanted to, the producers of this wanted to make a full-length movie of it, but the distribution company didn't want to fund it. So they went to Kickstarter and they asked for $2 million over the space of a month. They got almost $6 million from almost 100,000 backers. The movie came out, I think, last year and was a big success. So they actually turned to crowdfunding, to digital means to raise the funds. Digital resources also means content. Now you may think, well, we're not actually a media house. Turns out you are. If you have a website, you are a media owner. You already own a media property. And you are already very likely sitting on rivers of content, or at least the ideas for them. You can look for those in your staff's experience and in their ideas. And you can look for in customer requests and issues that were raised with you, industry developments. There are lots and lots of sources where you can get content ideas from. And you can turn those into content you can put out there to help your customers with their lives, with their work. Now, one thing about this is the page is dead. Don't think you have to create long-form content about everything. Twitter started the revolution of the chunk of content, and you can actually do very much with very small pieces of content. This gentleman from Havas Media Labs has put it this way. He said, the question isn't anymore in marketing, how loyal can we make our customers? It's how loyal are we to our customers? Do we truly understand them, care about them, and provide them with means to help them do their job better or live better lives? One example here is Net-a-Porter. Net-a-Porter is a hugely successful billion-dollar revenue, high-fashion online retailer. And if you look at their website, it doesn't actually look like an e-commerce site. It looks like a glossy magazine. And that's on purpose. What they do is they provide mainly content. You can also buy everything that's mentioned in the content, but they use digital mobile and recently print to provide content to their customers. By now, they make high-class fashion shoots that their customers can shop directly from, and they put that out there on various media, and they're increasingly moving from retail to publishing and back again. So retail is an enabler of publishing, and publishing becomes a driver for retail revenue. And they've gone a step further, and I like that aspect of it. They've actually taken big data. They've taken the fact that they sell thousands of dresses every day or pieces of clothing, and they've created something called Net-a-Porter Live, where you can see who's buying what where, scrolling past your screen live. So they're actually using their revenue data to then drive content again. Finally, technology. That's the obvious one we need to talk about in this context. And technology means that you should assess your current systems for how well they fit into your digital initiatives. Now, there's lots of talk about technology for digital transformation, but what we'd like you to remember is the agile approach. Don't try to bite off and chew the elephant. Don't try to buy into one massive system that will solve all your problems. Very often you'll find that tactical solutions that are okay for a particular period of time are actually better for your digital strategy than if you go for enterprise level so-called strategic applications. And obviously we would say that being technology agnostic, but we recommend you work with a partner who's not married to a single vendor or a single platform or technology, because they'll always end up pushing to you what they already know best or what they get their revenue from. So ideally you work with someone who can help you and assist you in finding the right technology solutions as well. And just a brief case study there. Swiss Federal Railways, they are the most dense railway network in the world, and that for their 3,000 or so train staff, they needed a technology solution to replace the aging laptops they had. And they went out and actually did a lot of research into their staff and their users and what they needed and wanted. And they came up, sorry about the German on this, they came up with recommendations for what these had to be. And ultimately what they rolled out by the end of last year is they allow people to use their own devices to access both their private content and whatever they do privately, as well as business things. So no more carrying around two devices. It also means that people treat the devices better because they are part of their life now, not just of their work life. So that's how they use technology in a novel way. Now, I promised you very briefly to talk about how to make it sustainable, but it's a bit of a repeat of what I've said earlier, namely that keeping it agile is the most important thing. Keeping it agile means evaluate what you do. Kill the 5-year plan. Don't go out, do half a year's research, write 2,000 pages of documentation, and then work to that for the next year. Produce concrete outcomes, not paper. So the outcome shouldn't be a PowerPoint presentation. The outcome should be something you've made, an incremental improvement to your processes, a website, a digital integration with your partner, whatever it is. Learn from that and iterate and succeed in increments over time. Now, based on those 12 elements that we went through, and I'm going to invite questions from you in a moment, based on those elements, we are in the process of creating what we call digital ready cards, which you can use at a management level to play with and to discuss those elements of digital readiness and where you could invest and what you could do and how well you're currently performing in that area. So that was a lot of talk from me. I think at this point I'd like to get Maurice back in and see whether he's had any questions, or if you'd like to raise any questions, please just put them into the chat at the, I think, bottom left of your screen.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So we've had quite a few questions coming from the attendees. First one being, what is the starting point for any organization who wants to be digitally ready?
Okay. The starting point is usually we find a bit of looking internally and seeing how well you do. So a form of digital audit can help. It doesn't have to be as in-depth as to go through all the 12 elements of the 3 pillars. But looking at how well you are doing at the moment helps you not invest in the wrong areas. You may be surprised that you're doing quite well in one particular area and not in another. And those audits are usually based on strong business results KPIs. So make sure that you define a KPI for each of the areas you look into that ensures that you're getting a return in that area. And where those are worse, that's where you start investing.
Okay. The second one, I think this is quite relevant to quite a few of us, quite a few of our clients this problem as well. How can someone persuade the senior management of his or her organization that they need to be digitally ready?
Okay, yep, you are already the senior management and you need to convince yourselves, but if you have to convince the boss of not particularly digitally savvy management of investing in this, obviously if you have the budget to invest in an audit, that's a good starting point as well. If you don't, pointing at done well using case studies would be a good start as well. But I think the most important aspect is you can actually do this transformation bit by bit. Remember the agile approach. So actually having a small project for a small piece of digital improvement that yields good returns based on your initial calculations is usually a good proof to management that there is value in digitizing your way of working.
Right. So the last one, asked, how can an organization get more understanding of what their customers want?
Yeah. Okay. We find very frequently that our clients have a reasonably good understanding of their customers, but there's always more for them to learn. So what we do a lot of is research, customer research, where we've got about 12 different research techniques that we use that we can actually use on real customers, and we engage our clients in this process as well. This can be usability testing on a current digital interface like a website. It can be mystery shopping. It can be observing customers as they use your services and so on. And these are usually fairly low-tech things that don't cost an awful lot of money, and that we very much encourage our clients to be a part of that research and to look into what their customers want in this way. As I said earlier, asking customers what they want is a fairly doomed approach. What you should do is observing them. And we always find that behavioral cues are always more important than attitudinal ones. So for us, a survey is usually the last resort, and we'd much rather look at analytics, look at observing people in the natural habitat, and so on, because people tell you one thing but then do another. And it's really important to know what they do when they don't feel observed. So behavioral research is our number one starting point there. Thanks, everyone.